Chodesh Tov, Good Chodesh, Afreilich in Chanukah. The sixth day of Chanukah is always Rosh Chodesh. You know that. This year we have 2 days Rosh Chodesh, 7th day also, but every year 6 days for sure Rosh Chodesh. So we have a double blessing today. It's Chanukah and it's a new month. A new month gives a new energy, and may it be a new energy for all of the Jewish people around the world for everything that we need. And we continue to learn Rambam. It's Chanukah. Can't say it enough. Lahashkicham teirasecha. If we learn on Chanukah, we are winning the Greeks today. We are being the Maccabees of today. So, Hilchos, Parah, Adumah, Perek Arba Asar. The laws of the red cow, chapter 14. Yesterday we spent the whole day talking about the stringencies, the special stringencies imposed in terms of the status of purity with relationship to the Parah Adumah. Today that conversation sort of continues, dealing with 2 major themes. The first theme is based on what it says in the Pasuk, that the ash of the Parah Adumah needs to be placed b'makom tahor, in a pure location. From this, the sages derived that there could be scenarios where technically, according to the dry laws of ritual impurity, the Parah Adumah water or ash or the utensil that it's in should not become impure, but because it's not b'makom tahor, because it's not called a pure place, so the ash and the water actually still do become impure. We got a couple of scenarios of that, and at the end of the chapter we deal with what happens if a utensil of chatos, Parah Adumah status utensil, and just sacrificial meat status utensil touch each other directly or through a person, how one utensil influences the other in terms of transferring its status to the other utensil. Says the Rambam halacha aleph, kli cheres, you have a pottery utensil, or the truth is any other utensil that is not susceptible to impurity. Shehaya by efer chatos. Inside is stored, here, efer Parah Adumah, beautiful, Parah Adumah ash. V'naga by sheretz mitzidai. Comes a dead rodent and touches this utensil from the outside. So of course, tahor, it's pure. And it's pure even here. We don't apply any stringency when it comes to Parah Adumah. She'ein kli cheres mitami migabei afilu legabei chatas. A pottery utensil cannot contract impurity from its back, even with regards to Parah Adumah stuff. And the Rambam's example is when there's ash. Truth is if there's water as well, as the commentaries point out. But let's say it was this scenario. You placed this utensil that's holding the ash directly on top of a dead rodent. And the commentaries add, even if it's not directly on top, even if there's some layers in between, the point is the location upon which this jug is resting is now impure. Even though by the laws of ritual impurity, the impurity is not transferred to the vessel. The utensil cannot contract impurity in this way. Nevertheless, the ash here becomes impure. Shenemar, for the reason that I showed you, it says in the Pasuk, the commandment is to take the ash and place them in a pure place. Sitting on top of a rodent is not called a pure place. It doesn't classify as a pure place. It gets even more. Not only on top of a rodent, which is like a biblical source of impurity. Even if you place such a jug on top of food, that's the second degree of vlad hatuma, of child level impurity. In other words, it's 2 degrees away from a primary source of impurity. Or anything like it, midvarim shatum asan tumakala. Things that their impurity is a light level of impurity, not severe. And they're only enacted rabbinically, the ash, because it's placed on this location, becomes impure. Shenemar b'makom tahor, because it says it has to be in a pure place. Shelo yiyeh al gabe shum tuma ba'olam. That means that it shouldn't be directly on top of any source of impurity at all whatsoever. Now, yesterday we said that in truth is all food, whether pure or impure, is considered to be impure with regards to Parah Adumah. So why is the Rambam picking a scenario where you placed it on top of Eichel Sheni, which is at least impure rabbinically? Let him just say you placed it on top of any food. Any food is considered to be by default impure for the Parah Adumah. So the other commentaries say that's not called a mokem tameh. Mokem tameh means it has to have some form of impurity. You want to talk about stringencies, that's separate things. But to put it on top and to classify it as impure place, that we're not going to do. The Chain continues the Rambam, so too, kli cheres shehaya by efer chatos. Okay, don't get scared. We're going back to the skylights. I know those were pretty detailed stuff in the corpse impurity. But here we're just going to take one element of it, okay? Kli cheres shehaya by efer chatos. You have a pottery utensil and it's holding ash of the Parah Adumah, v'nasun al aruba shebebayis tameh, and it's placed on a skylight that's in an impure home. That means there's a corpse somewhere in this home. The home is impure. And now the skylight, through which typically impurity could exit, at least if it has the right dimensions, is being covered, is being stuffed by this Parah Adumah container. Im haya hakli mishul shalabayis, says the Rambam, if the utensil was hanging a little bit into the airspace of the home, so even though, again, by dry laws of ritual impurity, this utensil cannot become impure, because it's pottery, it's getting tumah only from the outside, nothing about it is going to be impure. Nevertheless, because now it's in the airspace of the home, it's in a makom tameh, it's not a makom tar anymore, nitma ha'efer, the ash becomes impure. And I'll tell you more, says the Rambam. Even if the skylight doesn't have a tefach by a tefach of space, which in the laws of oil wouldn't even allow the tumah to even leave. Forget that it's a pottery utensil and it can't enter through the back. The tumah is not even going past the skylight. But because you're in the space of the home, you're not in a makom tar. That's all if the pottery utensil is hanging into the airspace. If it's not hanging into the airspace, so then if the skylight is less than a tefach by a tefach, so the whole roof is sealed, you can't call this container to be in a makom tameh. But at least if it had a tefach by a tefach of space, so the tumah is somewhat escaping to the area of the skylight, then tameh, at least the skylight also becomes classified as a makom tameh, and the utensil which is sitting in that place will cause the ash to become impure, even if again the utensil itself is not becoming impure. Halacha Bey, says the Rambam. The whole halacha aleph was talking about a pottery utensil. What if haya akli shel even? What if the utensil is stone utensil, which cannot even become tameh in any way, shape, or form? So then says the Rambam, bein sheyesh ba peseach tefach, bein she'ein ba ha'efer tar. Whether there is a tefach in the skylight or not, the ash is pure. It's not considered to be in a makom tameh. Now here there's a debate. Is the Rambam picking up on the last case in halacha aleph, where it wasn't hanging into the home? Or is this even true if it's hanging into the airspace of the home? The stone utensil is different. In other words, like this. Here's a pottery utensil, yeah? So we said, if it's hanging into the home, whether a tefach or not a tefach, it's tameh. If it's not hanging into the home, if the tefach is tameh, less tefach is tar. Then the Rambam picks up and says that if it's stone, it's tar either way. That's for sure speaking about if it's not hanging into the home. What if it's hanging into the home? Then we don't know, but the assumption is that it's also pure. Stone utensils just operate differently. Halacha Gimel, let's see another angle of this concept of makom tahor. How the idea that it has to be in a pure place will override some other laws of impurity which we're already familiar with. And that is the tzamid pasil. Remember that in the corpse, in the room with the corpse, the tumah enters everything, unless there's a utensil that's covered with a tightly sealed covering. Then it saves whatever is inside of it. It says that Rambam, over here, it's a little bit more complicated. Let us say that there is a utensil which has the Parah Adumah ash over here, or the Parah Adumah water, umukaf tzamid pasil v'nasun ba'el ames, and it's tightly sealed, and it's in the same room as a corpse. The ash and the water are going to become impure. Because the ash of the Parah Adumah cannot be saved with a tight covering. Because who cares? Tight covering, not tight covering. Again it says, return to the verse. What does it say? You put the ash in a pure place. This is not a pure place. Halacha Dalet says that the truth is, not only Parah Adumah stuff, but even sacrificial, carbon meat, carbon food is not going to be saved even if it's in a tight covering. But if you have Parah Adumah water that has not yet had the ash mixed into it, I didn't make that point before. In Halacha Gimel, Mayim Mekudashim means water that has already been mixed with ash. If it's water that hasn't been mixed with ash, or just an empty utensil that happens to be pure on the status of Parah Adumah, but not full with anything, nitzal b'tzamid pasul, then if it's in the utensil which is tightly covered, it will be saved from contracting impurity. Because, what does it say? The whole law of makom tahor is only for the ash, not for anything else. When do we say that, says the Rambam? If at least the owner, person in charge of the water, stayed pure. But if the owner becomes impure, you have another special stringency. Because he's the guard, if the guard becomes impure, the waters become impure, also disqualified wherever they are, even if they aren't in the room with the corpse. As the Rambam immediately gives us a visualization. What does this mean? Ketzad, hayu meimav mukafin samit pasil. Let us say that the water of the Parah Adumah was surrounded with a tight covering. Here's the Parah Adumah water, tightly sealed. V'hu v'hein ba'ayal ames. But it and the owner is also in the same room as the corpse. Shneim tmeim, they're both impure. Tight covering means nothing. If he's impure, the water is impure. Hayahu mibachutz. V'hamayim she'enan mikudashin mibifnim. If the owner is outside the room and the water, which is not mixed with ashes, is inside the room, shneim teirim, they're both pure. Because the owner has no problems, and non-ash water is okay to be in a corpse room with tight covering. Hu bifnim v'hamayim bachutz. If just the owner is inside, even if the water is outside, the same way the person is impure, so too the water becomes impure by extension. Let us assume this situation looks a little bit strange, but we have to know the halacha. A pure person, he's pure for Parah Adumah level. That's how pure he is. And he's standing on top of a oven, or anything like it, which is considered by default not to be pure for the level of chatas. So the fact that he's standing on the tanner itself is not a problem because he didn't touch it by hand. Touch it by hand, he'd become impure. But he's just standing on it. Okay? However, it's not a mokem tahar. You can't call it a pure place. And therefore, says the Rambam, if he stretches his hand outside the airspace of the oven, holding a utensil with Parah Adumah waters, or by the same token, you have a stick, a wooden stick, the commentaries say. It's not makabel tuma, not susceptible to impurity, so there's no inherent impure problems, only the mokem tahar problems. And two utensils with Parah Adumah water are hanging on it. Echad mikan, one on this side, one on that side. Harei elu timein. They become impure because they're not in a pure place that's pure enough for Parah Adumah. Since they're leaning on the oven, even in this case where they're hanging outside of it, or in the case of the person, outside of it, but they're leaning, their support is coming from the oven itself. It's as though they're placed on top of it. Let's say the same person was standing on the oven, but all he's holding is an empty utensil that's pure for Parah Adumah, or water that has not been mixed with ash. So the concept of mokem tahar doesn't apply to them. They stay pure as they were. How about this case? He is standing outside of the oven. In other words, not on the oven. He puts his hand into a window. Typically in those days, the windows were used for storing things. He takes a utensil that has Parah Adumah water, and simply passes it over the airspace of the tanner. So technically it's flown over a non-mokem tahar. Nevertheless, harezet tahar, that is pure, because it didn't come to rest. We have a rule that says, Kluta lav kemishahuncha. Something in the airspace is not considered to be placed with regard to these laws. Truth is, even a sprinkling of the actual Parah Adumah water. A guy is standing here, he's impure. The Kohen who's sprinkling is standing over here. He sprinkles on him, but it passes over a source of impurity. Like a place where a zav lied on or sat on, or things like that, like a carcass of an animal or a sheretz. That's pure. Now, the commentaries do say that if it would be a corpse itself, which transmits impurity by passing over, then of course the hazah would become impure. But here we're talking about mishkav and moshav, things like that, where the only issue is mokem tahar. This is classified as a mokem tahar. It hasn't come to rest on the impure element. Halacha vav, kli sheyesh by mechatas, or kli sheyesh by kodesh, shenagu zeh bazeh. We have two utensils. One is holding Parah Adumah water. The other is holding sacrificial meat. And they touched each other. So, you have to always remember, chatas is a higher level of purity. If you're pure for kodesh, doesn't make you pure for chatas. Chatas looks at this utensil and sees it as somewhat impure. So, and also, by the way, the commentaries say we're talking about a scenario where it's not really clay or pottery, it's a utensil which could become impure from its outside. Okay? So, says the Rambam, so since for the chatas utensil, the kodesh utensil is impure, so that makes that the chatas utensil and everything in it becomes impure. But the holy sacrificial utensil stays pure as it was. Because even though this utensil has become impure, and now it's touching back this utensil, but we know that a vlad hatuma, once you're out of the primary source of impurity, you cannot make utensils impure. So it will never pass back to the kodesh utensil. Maybe there was a person between them. Here's a person, he's sitting with a jug of chata stuff and a jug of kodesh stuff. He himself is pure on the chatas level. He touches both of them. Touches them both with both his hands as they're on the ground, or here they're on the bench. So what happens? He becomes a conduit. He causes the chatas utensil to become impure. Why? Because as we explained yesterday, one of the stringencies when it comes to Parah Adumah is that if a person is pure for Parah Adumah standards and he touches a utensil that's not pure on that standard, he becomes impure. So by touching the kodesh utensil, he becomes impure. Then he goes and makes the chatas with its water also impure, so the chatas utensil becomes impure. Now there's somewhat of a question, because tomorrow we're going to learn that once water is disqualified from being used, it transmits impurity. It itself has a tumah. So maybe that tumah should come back onto the person and also disqualify the kodesh utensil. But the commentaries say no, because he didn't touch the actual water with his hands. What if he were to lift the utensils? Okay, here's my AI picture. Not sure that's so amazing, but he lifted them, okay? Here they're actually on a surface, so it's no good. Lifted them up. Now they both become impure. What happened now? How come the tumah is passing back from the chatos to the kodesh? So the Rambam explains. The easy one is the chatos. Why does the chatas utensil become impure? Because it's touched by a person who just touched the utensil. It's not kosher. That's not pure enough for Parah Adumah standards. But also, this one also becomes impure because this time he lifted it up. He lifted up an improper Parah Adumah water. He now becomes impure because he carried sprinkling water, which communicate impurity for carrying, because they became impure. This is a very key word now. They became impure because of the kodesh utensil. Follow what happened. The kodesh utensil transmits its impurity through the person into the chatas. That makes the water in here now non-kosher water. Non-kosher Parah Adumah water transmits impurity. That therefore makes the person impure. And he transfers that impurity back to kodesh. So, the way we just translated the word mipnei shenitma'u was referring to the water. Now, the Kesef Mishnah doesn't say that. The Kesef Mishnah says that the pshat is because the person becomes impure. Since the person becomes impure, in other words, the mipnei is the reason for shehein mitamin b'masa. It's the reason for why the water is communicating impurity, because the person initially became impure through the kli of kodesh. In fact, the Ur Sameach writes that we should correct the Rambam over here. It shouldn't say mipnei shenitmu, it should say mipnei shenitma. However, there are those commentaries that do want to justify the wording of mipnei shenitmu and say that the water itself becomes impure because they're being lifted not for sprinkling purposes, because once they become disqualified, they cannot be used for sprinkling, and therefore they transmit impurity back to the kodesh. But either way, the point is the same. Lefikach, therefore, im hoya hakli shel kodesh karuch b'niyar. Let's say in this scenario, the kodesh utensil was wrapped with paper, and he picked it up by the paper without touching the utensil, and picked up with the second hand the chatas utensil, and they're actually both pure. Because the impurity doesn't go one way, because he didn't touch the utensil of kodesh, therefore he didn't become impure with his chatas, therefore he doesn't make the chatas utensil impure, and surely it doesn't go back. But on the other hand, as long as by hand he's touching this utensil of kodesh, even if the Parah Adumah is wrapped in paper, it doesn't block. Shneim tmeim, they're both impure. Because once the person's body becomes impure from touching the kodesh utensil, it transfers right away to the chatas utensil. And then once the chatas utensil is impure, it goes back to make the kodesh utensil impure. Till now we're talking about a case where he actually touches both utensils directly. What if it was only hesed? Hesed means you cause to move. Here's the board, here's a board. On each board is one of the jugs. The person goes with his hand and bangs on the board, let's just say, causing both jugs to move. Or the commentaries say he could have equally touched it with his feet, which is the same idea. It's not directly through the hands. Shnei and Tahirim, they're both pure. Because even though yesterday we had a stringency that utensils that are not pure for chatas make people that are pure for chatas impure, that's only if they touch directly through the hands. Not through the hands, not impure. Unless it was a fitting utensil which could become impure through a zav, sitting or lying on it, as we explained, fine. Then granted over there, even if you would cause it to move, it would also cause impurity. But on a basic level, it doesn't. Halacha tes. As we're going to explain later on in this book, there are many cases of doubtful impurities. And when it comes to truma, determining whether we can partake of a special truma food that goes to the Kohen, which you have to be pure to partake in that. So many times in doubtful cases, we say, you know what, you're still considered pure for truma. So anytime we have a doubt where you're considered pure for truma, we don't elevate a stringency and say, oh, for Parah Adumah, that wouldn't apply. No, it does. If the same doubt arose around the Parah Adumah water, contact with this source of impurity, the doubt would be resolved leniently. Whereas anytime there's a doubt which causes the truma to be hung in the balance and suspended, and you can no longer eat the truma, if the same thing happened to the water of the Parah Adumah water, so we tell the water to be spilled out. We don't use it anymore. And here we have a line where there's two different interpretations. It's not so clear what the Rambam means over here. It says the Rambam, V'imnasu taris, if pure procedures were performed, al gabe oisan kelim va'adam, with the people or utensils, shenoldu lahen sveikos elu shehachatoyes nishpachin alein, who had the doubts arise, which caused the Parah Adumah waters to be spilled. What does that mean? So the classic interpretation is that those same waters that were meant to be spilled were then used as sprinkling waters on the people and the utensils that had these doubts arise. So instead of spilling out the water, you used it in sprinkling. That's one interpretation. And on that, the Rambam says, anything that was done with that will be suspended and treated as doubtful. You can't for sure use it. The Rambam, in his commentary to the Mishnah, though, seems to translate this a little differently. V'imnasu tares means, tares refers to what's called chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh. People used to treat their regular grain, regular food, at the level of sacrificial meat standards. So here the Rambam is talking about chulin shenasu al taras chatas. What if it's not actual Parah Adumah water? What if it's just tares? What if it's just regular stuff that's being treated with chatas level? And then, about that stuff arises a doubt, which would typically cause Parah Adumah actual water to be spilled out. We don't spill out the chulin, instead we let it just be suspended and we don't resolve what its law is. Okay, I'm not sure I gave that over clearly, but it's two different interpretations of what this means, and it still remains a little bit enigmatic. Another final comment says that loose window screens made of wooden slats, something like this. There was loose wooden boards in summer houses that they used to have, which could allow in wind sometimes, but it would also a little bit block. Einan kikelim, they're not considered like utensils, and all the laws we just spoke about utensils of kodesh and chatas and everything, they're considered to be pure with regards to truma, with regards to kodesh, with regards to chatas, on every level, they're considered to be pure. Halacha yut. Says the Rambam a very interesting scenario. Dveila shel truma shenafla l'seich mei chatas. You have a fig cake that falls into Parah Adumah water. Now the fig cake is truma, mind you, so truma has to be eaten in purity. And remember that Parah Adumah water cannot be touched by any food. All food is considered to be tameh with regards to Parah Adumah water. So you have a double problem, okay? Once this fig cake falls into the water, unatala va'achala, and a person takes it and eats it, in yeshba kebetza, if it was an egg size, a volume of an egg, hamayim tmeim, so first of all, it made the water impure, ben shaysa advela tmeya, ben shaysa teira, whether or not the actual fig cake was pure or impure, shekala eichlin afilo eichel kaidesh ein etar lechatos, because all food, even sacrificial food, is not considered to be pure when it comes to Parah Adumah. V'ha'eichla, and the person who eats the fig cake, at least in the case where it was pure, chayav misa is liable to the death penalty at the hands of heaven. Because he ate this truma food after having become impure. Once it's in the water, it makes the water impure. The water then makes it impure. And you're eating truma tmeya, which is misa b'dei. That's all if the fikik was the volume of an egg. But if it isn't the volume of an egg, hamayim b'taharas on the water stays pure. Because food cannot transmit impurity until it's the size of an egg. Bein l'truma, bein l'kodesh, bein l'chatas, across the board for truma, sacrificial meat, and parah adumah. Therefore, the whole chain reaction doesn't begin. The water doesn't become impure. The cake doesn't become impure. So if you eat it, you're totally fine.